It was 2018, and I will remember that day forever. Even now, the memory still gives me goosebumps. My name is Enrico, and I am 60 years old. That day, I was in the car, heading to a friend's house, as I often did. The day was clear, but while I was driving, I felt a sudden sense of fatigue, as if my body had exhausted its energy. Suddenly, the steering wheel veered to the right, and everything changed. In an instant, I lost control, and the car skidded, crashing into a barrier. The impact was violent. My breath stopped, and an unbearable pain coursed through me. But after a few moments, that pain vanished, leaving behind a surreal silence. I found myself suspended, as if I had left my body, watching the scene from above. Everything was so clear, so real, yet there was an inexplicable peace that seemed to dominate everything. After my eyes closed, an oppressive darkness enveloped me suddenly. It felt like I was suspended in an empty, silent space where time did not exist. At first, there was a strange, almost numbing calm, but soon the darkness began to change. The air became icy, as if the cold came from within my very soul. Around me, indistinct shadows appeared and disappeared, similar to barely visible faces floating at the edge of my vision. Then, I began to distinguish figures approaching. They were familiar faces, icons from a past life, famous characters who seemed to have lost their way in this gloomy place. At first, I saw them motionless, like statues, but slowly they moved closer with icy stares and mocking smiles. Their eyes were empty, seeming hollowed out by suffering. When one of them spoke, the voice was broken, like a whisper and a growl combined, and its tone was filled with bitterness. "So you too, finally," it said. I felt that every word was carving something inside me, exposing every fear, every mistake and guilt like a painful reflection. I tried to retreat, but it seemed I was trapped in a black, viscous web, a prison without walls from which there was no escape. Each figure highlighted a failure of mine, a fall, and the tone became increasingly threatening, as if they were feeding on my terror. When it seemed that all warmth had vanished, I realized where I was, an endless expanse of tormented shadows, a place that seemed to reflect every nightmare never lived. And as the cold penetrated deeper into my heart, I understood that my soul had been sucked into something terrifying, something that was trying to show me a buried and perhaps inexorable truth. Suddenly, a long, dark corridor appeared before me, and I felt pushed toward its end, where something I needed to see seemed to reside. With each step, a dark and restless energy enveloped me, as if the very floor emitted a lamenting murmur. At the end of the corridor, a large, dark opening seemed to pulsate with a strange energy, as if it were alive. Through the entrance, I found myself in a vast cavern that seemed endless, dominated by an immense rocky wall, similar to a broken mountain. It was a gloomy and mysterious place, and its slopes were covered with figures weighed down by thick chains, motionless like statues. Climbing that path cost me every fragment of energy. It was as if each step consumed a piece of my soul, emptying me of everything except fear. In that timeless torment, my gaze settled on a figure I never thought I would see. A woman with refined features but a desperate look sat on a solitary peak, surrounded by emptiness. She had the same elegant charm as someone from another era, someone the world had loved and admired. She was an iconic figure, similar to Princess Diana, but here she seemed a faded shadow of her former glory. Her face, though recognizable, was marked by suffering. In her eyes, there was a deep weariness, like someone imprisoned in endless solitude. I approached her, and for a moment, her eyes met mine, trying to express a sadness without words. She whispered something to me, her voice cracked with indescribable pain. Her gaze seemed to implore understanding while also revealing a story of torment she couldn't explain. As I continued to stare at her, I realized that the suffering in that place was something that could neither be avoided nor explained. It was a place where the soul was eternally suspended in torment, where every regret resurfaced, heavier and more painful than I could have imagined. It's very easy to understand why I'm here if someone knew how I truly lived, Diana began, her voice marked by a bitterness that seemed carved into time. When I was young, I was different. I remember when I believed in a simple and pure love, and in the Christian faith with sincere conviction. My family had raised me with certain values, and I dreamed of building a family that reflected that purity. But joining the royal family changed everything. I saw my own heart transform, not always into something beautiful. She paused as if gathering the courage to confess something she had never revealed before. Yes, I discovered Charles's relationship with Camilla, but the truth is, our bond was already worn out, and I too had sought refuge in other people before knowing it. Life at court consumes you, transforms you into someone you don't recognize. The coldness, the lack of true affection, the facade you have to maintain. All of this made me a person I never wanted to be. In her eyes was a heavy sadness, as if every word freed her, but also tormented her. I had the world at my feet, but the price I paid was isolation and immense loneliness. I let myself be dragged by the need for attention, for validation, and I began to live for the image, seeking refuge in the admiring gazes of people. I felt loved for what I represented, not for who I really was, and this superficial love dug a void inside me that I couldn't fill. You see, she continued, fame, media attention. I had deluded myself into thinking they would complete me, that they could compensate for everything I didn't find at court. But they were just mirages. Every glance, every applause made me feel a moment less alone, but they always ended up leaving me empty. And I, who once had faith, lost my way. I participated in the rites, but my heart was far away, confused, trapped in a vortex of appearances and illusions. She stopped, her face marked by a deep shadow. Here, in this place, there are no applause, no titles. I am naked in front of my mistakes. I thought I could be a symbol for others, but I was nothing more than a faded figure, a shadow built on others' expectations. The love I sought externally gave me nothing real, and now I feel the full weight of the choices that took me away from what matters. With a distant look and a sigh, she concluded, I sought the adoration of the world, but I ended up losing my soul. I distanced myself from everything I believed in, and I realized too late how much I had let myself be blinded by ephemeral splendor. Now I am here, a prisoner of my illusions and regrets, with nothing left to offer myself. Continuing along the dark path, I felt the weight of the darkness increasing around me. The temperature dropped, and the feeling of remorse and despair became more intense, as if I were in a valley of deep regrets. A new figure appeared before me, with a face marked by a melancholic shadow. It was Whitney Houston. Her presence was imbued with such profound sadness that it seemed almost tangible, as if the echo of her voice still vibrated in that desolate place. Whitney stared at me with a fragile expression, her eyes still bright but weighed down by pain. People knew me for my voice, for my strength on stage, she began, her voice a whisper filled with regret. But inside me, there was a silent battle, a pain I couldn't smother. I tried to fill that void with fame, with applause, but nothing was enough. I was sucked in by my own demons and by people who fed on my fragility. Here, I'm forced to hear every echo of that fame as an endless void. My own successes seem to laugh at me now, leaving me with a sense of loneliness that even my voice cannot fill. As I watched her, it was as if her successes, her glory, and her pain were intertwined in eternal torment. Whitney was trapped between the desire to be loved and the destructive spiral she had fallen into. She was a tragic reflection of a talent devoured by fame, destined to relive her own regrets. Shortly after, I heard an unusual noise, a rhythmic sound that seemed like distant drums, but slow and unsettling. Another figure appeared before me, tall, enveloped in an aura of mystery and melancholy. It was Michael Jackson, his face marked by torment that seemed endless. He looked at me with eyes full of sadness, his face bearing a mask of emotions hard to interpret. "I was worshipped by millions," he said, his voice a nearly broken whisper. "But I lived a life of solitude. All I wanted was to regain my innocence, to feel free from all that weight. I tried to reinvent myself, to escape my own image. But in the end, I remained a prisoner of the world that adored me." He paused, his eyes distant, then continued, "Here, I cannot escape the reality of what I was. My soul is trapped in an endless cycle, imbued with the expectations and judgments I endured, and sometimes encouraged. I am forced to relive every step, every attempt to flee from myself, knowing there is no way out." Michael Jackson seemed like a soul teetering between light and shadow, a man divided between his public image and his private vulnerability, destined to be swallowed by the void he had sought to fill in life. Further ahead, in the shadows, a silent figure watched me with a deep and intense gaze. It was Chadwick Boseman, his face calm but marked by profound awareness. Unlike the others, Chadwick seemed immersed in a melancholic stillness, as if he understood the weight of the place he was in, but faced it with dignity. "I tried to make sense of my life, to leave something good behind," he said, his voice calm but vibrating with emotion. "I strived to be an example, to inspire those who watched me, but I too knew the shadow of pride and vanity. Sometimes I placed too much value on my image, on others' expectations, trying to be perfect. In life, I dedicated myself to a cause, to hope for the future, but I neglected to confront some demons within me." He paused, his gaze still fixed on the void. "Now, here, I feel the weight of every moment I allowed my image to prevail over the person, of every time I wore a mask to hide my vulnerability. My regret is not having lived fully, always driven by the urgency to leave a legacy. But even here, I understand that the true legacy is not in what you leave behind, but in who you truly are. And in that sense, I fear I missed something fundamental." Chadwick seemed to carry a more subdued torment, an inner reflection that kept him bound to that place. He was a soul aware of his own fragility and the weight of fame, destined to reflect for eternity on the choices he had made. "After experiencing this journey through darkness, I feel I have something to say that cannot remain silent. Every face I met, every story whispered to me, became a piece of my own soul, a reflection of what could happen to each of us if we are not careful with the path we choose. Whitney showed me how we can become prisoners of what we desperately seek in others. Michael reminded me that running away from ourselves only leaves us further from peace. And Chadwick taught me that, no matter how much we aspire to be heroes for the world, we are vulnerable and sometimes fragile inside. They all lived grand and intense lives, but each one lost their way, in one way or another, in solitude, in the need for approval, in the sacrifice of oneself. In the end, I believe the true trap is not suffering or weakness. It is never having the strength to face them. From every soul I met, I understood that our fears and desires can become chains if we are not willing to acknowledge them and work to break them. And I realized that to truly save ourselves, we must be ready to bear what we fear to look at within ourselves. Redemption is not just about forgiving or being forgiven. It is about understanding and accepting our own fragilities, because that is where true strength lies. I also understood that perhaps this journey was granted to me for a reason, not to make me suffer or punish me, but to give me a new chance, to remind me of what truly matters before it's too late. It's as if destiny had me descend into the darkest corners of the human soul to make me rise again with eyes finally open. I was shown that every choice carries weight, and that every regret, if not faced, can become a prison we carry with us, even beyond this life. Now, as I return to my life, I feel the need to do something different, to live in a way that leaves behind not just memories, but acts of kindness, forgiveness, and understanding. I feel the need to reach out to those I have hurt, to apologize, to make peace with the parts of myself I have always tried to ignore. I feel the responsibility to walk with sincerity and humility, knowing that it is never too late to change, that every single day can be an opportunity to start anew. This experience has taught me that no matter how low we can fall, there is always a possibility of redemption if the heart is willing to seek it. To those who have listened to this story, I want to say, do not be afraid to look within yourselves. Do not let regrets fill your lives. Be grateful for every breath, for every hug, for every laugh, and never postpone love, understanding, or forgiveness. Be kind to yourselves and to those around you because, in the end, it is only the good we leave behind that can truly save us. And so, I return to living, with the humble hope that my journey may remind some of you that redemption is always possible, that our mistakes do not define us forever. Love, forgiveness, hope are thin but indestructible threads, ready to guide us even when we think we have lost our way. Thank you for listening. May this message bring you peace and remind you that every soul can find the light, even in the darkest depths.